Hi everyone, my name is Shakia Bundick. I did my presentation, my third presentation on location and layout strategy. Now, Federal Express or FedEx is a good example of a company that stresses the hub concept. The hub concept is considered air travel. It is strategically located in an airport or city where a carrier's major facilities and operations are housed, and where most of its scheduled flights originate from or terminate at. In supply chain management, Hub refers to a central warehouse that's used to cater to various destinations that may be directly to the customer, stores, or other smaller warehouses. It's an important part of the supply chain strategy and used to optimize the overall transportation costs. Hubs are generally placed at the places that are nearest to customers. A production unit may not be near to a customer. Therefore, in some cases, bigger warehouses are made near the customers in order to serve them to minimize costs and shorter lead time. The various benefits of hubs are the optimization of transportation costs, shorter lead time, enables implementation of the JIT delivery or just in time delivery, and reduction of in plant inventory and allows level of production. Some advantages to Federal Express are the ability to enable service to make locations with fewer aircraft, enables matching aircraft flights with package loads, and reduces mishandling and delays in transit. A location strategy is a plan for obtaining the optimal location for a company by identifying company needs and objectives and searching for locations with offerings that are compatible with these needs and objectives. Generally, this means the firm will attempt to maximize opportunity while minimizing cost and risk. A company's location strategy should confirm with and be a part of its overall corporate strategy. Thus, if a company strives to become a global leader in telecommunications equipment, it must consider establishing plants and warehouses in regions that are consistent with its strategies and that are optimally located to serve its global customers. Being in the right location is most definitely the key ingredient in a business's success. A company selects the wrong location and it may have adequate access to customers, workers, transportation, materials, and so on. Consequently, location does often play a significant role in a company's profit and overall success. The objective of location strategy is to maximize the benefit of location firm with options that include expanding existing facilities, maintaining existing and add sites, and closing existing and relocating. Now, formulating a location strategy typically involves 10 factors. These 10 factors are facilities, which is planning that involves determining what kind of space a company will need, giving its short term and long term goals. Two, feasibility is an assessment of the different operating costs and other factors associated with different locations. Logistics is an evaluation of the appraisal of the transportation options and costs of the prospective manufacturing and warehousing facilities. Labor analysis, number four, determines whether prospective locations can meet a company's labor needs given its short term and long term goals. Number five is community insight. Community insight evaluation involves examining whether a company and a prospective community insight will be compatible in the long term. Trading zones may not allow companies to consider the benefits offered by free trade zones. These are closed facilities monitored by customs serv- services where goods can be bought without the usual customs requirements. The United States has about 170 free trade zones, and other countries have them as well. Number seven is the political risk. Companies considering to expand into other countries must take political risk into consideration when developing a location strategy. Some countries have unstable political environments, therefore, companies must be prepared for upheaval and terminal if they plan long term operations in such countries. Governmental regulation is number eight. Uh, Companies also may face government barriers and heavy restrictions and regulations if they intend to expand into other countries. Therefore, the examination of governmental as well as cultural obstacles in other countries when developing location strategies is necessary. Number nine, environmental regulation. Companies should consider the various environmental regulations that might affect their operations in different locations. Environmental regulation also may have an impact on the relationship between a company and the community around a prospective location. And number 10, incentives. This is the process by which a company and a community negotiate property and any benefits the company will receive, such as tax breaks. Incentives may place a significant role in a company's selection of a site. Depending on the type of business, companies also may have to examine other aspects of prospective locations and communities based on these considerations. Companies are able to choose a site that will best serve their needs and help them achieve their goals. There are factors that affect location decisions. They are location decisions, labor productivity, exchange rates, currency risks and costs, political risks, values and culture, and proximity to market suppliers and competitors. These factors that influence the location's decisions um, may allow for manufacturing to have an availability of energy and water, proximity to raw materials, and transportation costs, and allow service to have traffic patterns, proximity to markets again, and location of competitors. Important factors have been determined, and once the important factors have been determined, an organization will narrow down alternatives to a specific geographic region. These factors that influence location selection are often different depending on whether the firm is a manufacturing or service firm. When deciding on the location, managers must take into account the cultural shock employees might face after a location move. Culture shock can have a big impact on employees, which might affect workers' productivity. So it is important that managers look at this. Location decisions for country decisions. When you want to expand over into another country, there are certain things that should be taken into consideration. Um, a decision maker must understand the benefits and risk as well as probabilities of them occurring. Um, some items that have been listed are political risks, government rules, attitudes, and incentives that have to be considered, cultural and economic issues, location of the markets, labor availability, attitudes, productivity, and cost, availability of supplies, communications, and energy, and also exchange rates and currency risk. The next location decision, when you are making a decision for a region, there are some major considerations as well. Those are corporate desires, attractiveness of region, labor availability, costs, attitudes towards unions, cost and availability of utilities, environmental regulations of state and town, government incentive, proximity to raw materials and customers, and land and construction costs. Now, for location to raw materials, The three most important reasons for a firm to locate in a particular region includes those raw materials, flexibility, and transportation costs. This often depends on what business the firm is in. Location markets is a profit that maximizes firms' locations near markets that they want to serve as part of their competitive strategy. A geographic information system, or GIS, is a computer based tool for collecting, storing, retrieving, and displaying demographic data on maps. To make a decision for a community, a company must also take in the important factors for deciding upon the community in which they want to move the business. They include facilities for education, shopping, recreation, and transportation, among many others. From a business standpoint, these factors include utilities, taxes, and environmental regulation. When making a site decision, the main considerations in choosing the site are land, transportation, zoning, nearness of service suppliers needed, and environmental impact issues. When identifying a site, it is important to consider to see if the company plans on growing at this location. If so, the firm must consider whether or not the location is suitable for expansion. There are many decisions that go into choosing exactly where a firm will establish its operations. First, the company must determine the driving factors that will influence which areas are the suitable locations. After these factors have been determined, the company will identify potential countries and examine the pros and cons of establishing operations in those countries. After looking at the pros and cons of the different countries and deciding on a country, then decision makers will identify a region within that country. When identifying a region, decision makers must take the four major factors explained into consideration. The last two stages of the search include choosing a community and a site. Also, when choosing a site, labor productivity is something, or choosing a location, making that decision for what location you want to be in. Labor productivity is something to also take into consideration because one, wage rates are not the only cause, and lower productivity may increase total cost. Some formulas to figure the, this labor productivity out would be the labor cost per day divided by productivity, and that would be units per day, will equal the labor cost per unit, which will give you a better understanding. Here I have some examples for labor cost in Maryland and Florida, just some examples and how the math would actually come out. Some important formulas would also be for the total cost, you would do a fixed cost plus the variable cost per unit, and that would be the quantity or value of output. The formula for total profit would be quantity, which is revenue, then it would be revenue per unit minus variable cost per unit. Then you would have to times that by quantity and subtract the fixed costs. Exchange rates, currency risk, and costs. Now, exchange rates and currency risk can have a significant impact on costs and rates that can actually change over time. Now, costs are both tangible and intangible. We actually discussed that in my previous presentation with quality. Some examples of that are tangible products are measured costs such as utilities, labors, materials, and taxes. Intangible service are not as easily to quantify and include education, public transportation, community, and quality of life. Political risk, values, and culture um, are national, state, local governments. attitude toward intellectual and private property zoning, pop, zoning, pollution, and employment stability may be fluked. Now, worker attitudes toward the turnover unions and absenteeism may actually cause problems and risk within that within you trying to make a decision for where you want your company to be located. And global cultures have different attitudes toward legal punctuality and ethical issues. The proximity to market suppliers and competitors, the three factors that must be taken into consideration again are market, suppliers, and competitors. We did go over that before. We're going to move along to the next slide. Now, there are some analytical techniques to evaluating location alternatives. In order for you to evaluate those analytical techniques um, to evaluate the location for alternatives, the first thing is the location cost value profit, or CVP. Now, this analysis can be represented either mathematically or geographically. It involves three steps. The first step is for each location alternative determined in fixed and variable costs. Two, for all locations, plot the total cost lines on the same graph. And three, the last step is to use the lines to determine which alternatives will have the highest and lowest total cost for expected levels of output. Additionally, there are four assumptions one must be kept in mind when using this method. Fixed costs are constant, variable costs are linear, required level of output can be closely estimated, and there is only one product involved. The total cost, the math for this would be the total cost equals the fixed cost, and then it would actually be the variable cost times the number of units, which would be Q. Factor rating is the second analytical technique, and this method involves qualitative and quantitative inputs and evaluates alternatives based on comparison after establishing a composite value for each alternative. Factor rating consists of 6 steps. They are to determine relevant and important factors. Step 2, assign a weight to each factor with all weights totaling 1. Step 3, determine common scale for all factors, usually 0 to 100. Step 4, score each alternative. Step 5, adjust score using weights, multiply factor weight by score rate, and add the scores for each alternative. Step 6, the alternative of the highest score is considered the best option. Now, minimum scores may be established to set a particular a particular standard, though it is not necessary. The third analytical technique is the center of gravity method. This technique is used in determining the location of a facility, which will either reduce travel time or lower shipping costs. Distribution cost is seen as a linear function of this distance and quantity shift, of the distance and quantity shift. The center of gravity method, it involves the use of visual map and, and coordinate system. The coordinate points being treated as a set of numerical values when calculating averages. If the quantities shipped to each location are equal, the center of gravity is found by taking the averages of the x and y coordinates. If the quantities shipped to each location are different, a weighted average must be applied, the weights being the quantities shipped. So back to identifying a country, region, and community. And site. The availability of energy and water, proximity to raw materials, and transportation costs are under the manufacturing and underservicing traffic patterns, proximity to markets, and location of competitors is also a part of service and one of the factors that influence location decisions. There are some requirements of the company when developing a location strategy. Now, developing a location strategy is determining that what a company will require of its location. The initial part of developing the location strategy is the needs that serve as some of the primary criteria a company uses to evaluate different options. Some of the basic requirements a company must consider are the size, which would be the size of the property or facility that is needed for the company, traffic. It, with traffic, you have to obtain statistics on the amount of traffic or the number of pedestrians that may pass by a prospective location each day, the location that is picked. The population, which is whether a service or manufacturing operation, a company must examine the population of prospective locations to ensure that there is a significant number of potential customers or a significant number of skilled or trainable workers. In addition, manufacturers also benefit from being close to their customers because proximity to customer reduces shipment time and increases company responsiveness to customers. Total cost, and companies must determine the maximum total cost they are willing to pay for a new location. The total costs include distribution, land, labor, taxes, utility, and construction costs. More obscure costs also should be considered, such as transportation costs to ship materials and supplies, and the loss of customer responsiveness if moving further away from the customer base. Infrastructure must be considered when the infrastructure requirements will be, including what modes of transportation they will need and what kinds of telecommunication services and equipment will be needed. Labor is used for establishing their labor criteria. You have to look at labor and determine what kind of labor pool they will need, including the desired education and skill levels. Suppliers, companies must consider the kinds of suppliers they will need near their locations. In addition, other suppliers nearby can help companies reduce their production costs. Besides these basic requirements, companies must take into consideration their unique requirements of prospective locations. And these requirements may correspond to their overall corporate strategy. Layout strategy is one of the strategic areas that determines the long term efficiency of operations. The objective of layout strategy is to develop an economical layout that will meet the firm's competitive requirements. Location or arrangement of everything within and around the building is also taken into consideration. This does help to achieve a strategy that suppliers differentiation, lower cost, or quick response. That supports differentiation, low cost, or quick response. It also determines long run efficiency of operations. The importance of strategic layout is flexibility to change or use small, movable, or modular equipment, improved employee morale and safer working conditions, improved customer client interaction, higher utilization of space, equipment, and people, and improved flow of information, materials, or people. The types of layout are office layout, which are position workers their equipment and spaces offices to provide for movement of information throughout the office. Retail layout allocates self space and responds to customer behavior. Warehouse layout addresses trade offs between space and material handling. Fixed position layout addresses the layout requirements of large, bulky projects such as ships and buildings. Process-oriented layout deals with low volume, high variety production. This is also called job shop or intermittent production. Work cell layout is a specific arrangement of machinery and equipment to focus on production of a single product or group of related products. And the final type of layout is product oriented layout. This seeks the best personnel and machine utilizations in repetitive or continuous product. A model facility layout should be able to provide an ideal relationship between raw material, equipment, manpower, and final product at minimal cost under safe and comfortable environment. An efficient and effective facility layout can cover the following objectives. These these layout objectives are as follow: to provide optimum space to organize equipment and facilitate movement of goods and to create safe and comfortable work environments, to promote order in production towards a single objective, to reduce movement of workers, raw material, and equipment, to promote safety of plant as well as its workers, to facilitate extension or change in the layout to accommodate new production line or technology upgraduation, and to increase production capacity of the organization. An organization can achieve the above mentioned objectives by ensuring the following: better training of the workers and supervisors, creating awareness about of health, hazard, and safety standards, and optimizing utilization of workforce and equipment, and encouraging empowerment and reducing administrative and other indirect work. Factors: there are some things that actually affect layout. Facility layout designing and implementation is influenced by various factors. These factors that affect facility layout vary from industry to industry, but influence facility layout. Um, these factors are: the facility layout should consider the design of the facility layout should be considered overall through the objectives set by the organization. Optimal space needs to be allocated for process and technology. A proper safety measurement as to avoid mishaps needs to be established, and overall management policies and future direction of the organization need to happen as well. The design of facility layout requires principles which drive design of facility layout needed to take into consideration the objective of the facility layout, factors influencing facility layout, and constraints of facility layout. Also, are all things that influence and need to be taken in consideration when you are designing the facility layout. Some of these principles are flexibility. This is a facility layout that should provide flexibility for expansion or modification. Space utilization, you want to make sure the optimum space utilization reduces the time and material and people movement and promotes safety as well, which is very important. Capital investment um, should be minimal when designing different models of facility layout. Design layout techniques. There are three techniques of design layout, and they are two or three dimensional templates. Now, this technique utilizes development of a scaled down model based on approved drawings. The second technique is a sequence analysis. This technique utilizes computer technology in designing the facility layout by sequencing out all activities and then arranging them in circular or in a straight line. Line balancing is the kind of technique that is used for the assembly line. There are three types of facility layout. They are line layout, and this is the type of layout all the materials In this type of layout, all the materials and machines are grouped together according to their function. Number two, line layout. In this type of layout, equipments are placed in order in which they are used for production. And fixed position layout. In this type of layout, the equipments are used to keep are used the equipments that are used are kept in a fixed position. It happens mostly in cases of heavy machinery, such as aeroplane manufacturing facilities or ship manufacturing factories. I do want to thank everyone for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.